Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire asks Kyle for the full Audra story in Colin's most recent scam. Kyle Abbott will be asked to tell the entire narrative of Audra Charles by Claire Newman. If Victor Newman's assertions are accurate, then Colin Atkinson's most recent scam will also be exposed. Lily Winters forces Holden Novak to reveal Kane's real purpose at the beginning of Y&R's weekly ad. Holden will contend that Lily is mistaken if she believes he is aware of Kane's overarching strategy. Holden will try to persuade Lily that they are both in the dark, but she will find that extremely difficult to believe. Victor will then meet Kane on his train and provide him some clues on Colin's most recent big scam. Victor will discuss Kane's enormous Genoa City real estate grab and imply that it was the product of corrupt money because Kane will be curious about what Victor is saying. Victor will pretend that he trusted Colin too much given his past, even if Kane insists that he earned all of his income legally. Victor might maintain that Kane's father lied, despite Colin's assertion that he wished to assist Kane in doing things correctly. Claire will never be able to get rid of the notion that Kyle hasn't given her the complete story. Regarding what transpired with Audra at Kane's summer residence, Kyle is in fact keeping things to himself. Kyle, is there anything you haven't shared with me regarding Audra and your time in Nice? Anything at all? In Y&R's weekly preview video, Claire poses the question. Although Claire dislikes questioning her partner, she is unable to stop herself after Audra has been making so many accusations against Kyle. Claire isn't feeling quite right, so she will ask Kyle for the whole truth and hope he will tell her. Will Kyle give in to pressure from Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott to come clean as well? If Kyle lies to Claire now, he might dig himself an even deeper hole. Kyle might reveal the one kiss he's been keeping to himself, but that's not the whole tale. When Kyle and Audra went too near on the bed during their full-fledged makeout session, Kyle was only wearing a towel. Keep checking back for more details on Claire's impending pain, as you can guarantee Kyle's secrets will eventually come to light. Another round of terrible news about Claire and Kyle's romance is on the horizon, according to spoilers for The Young and the Restless. Harrison returns home amid the turmoil in Kyle and Claire's relationship. There can be mayhem when Harrison Abbott returns home. After Audra Charles executes her latest vindictive scheme, Kyle Abbott and Claire Newman might not be able to conceal their relationship problems. Harrison will soon be returning to Genoa City with Kyle and his other loved ones after spending time with Summer Newman in Milan. Claire, Harrison's previous nanny, has a unique relationship with him. With Harrison's intelligence and ability to take things up quickly, it will be difficult to conceal any growing turmoil. For some time now, Kyle and Claire have been dealing with an Audra crisis, but he wants to maintain their relationship. Claire is attempting to maintain her contempt for Audra and trust Kyle, but she may not be able to do so for long. You can guarantee Audra will want revenge because Claire is about to wreck her relationship with Nate Hastings. The relationship between Kyle and Claire may also be doomed because Audra will not tolerate that. Kyle continues to skirt the crucial question of what truly transpired in Nice behind closed doors. Claire is unaware that when Kyle was wearing a towel, he had a serious makeout session with Audra. Kyle left a lot out of that story since he even went so far as to lie down on the bed with Audra beneath him. Audra might make it her goal to get Kyle tell the truth about their nearly explosive sleeping vehicle session. Kyle says there was no risk of it getting worse, but how can Claire be certain when he has been lying to her all along? Naturally, Audra can come up with other strategies to control the circumstance and intensify the already developing dispute. Harrison might return home to complete upheaval, at least in regards to the breakdown of Kyle and Claire's relationship. Claire Newman had never been one to let suspicion linger in silence, and as the late summer sun dipped beyond the rooftops of Genoa City, she sat across from Kyle Abbott, her eyes narrowing in that sharp, intuitive way that told him she was tired of half-truths and evasions. She wanted the full Audra Charles story, and she was going to get it, no matter how uncomfortable it became. Because Victor Newman's cryptic warnings about Colin Atkinson's most recent scam had planted seeds of doubt not only about Colin's shady dealings but also about Kyle's ability to tell her everything without holding back. And so when she asked, "Kyle, is there anything you haven't shared with me regarding Audra and your time in Nice? Anything at all?" The room seemed to thicken with tension, the walls pressing in on Kyle as though every lie he'd told or omission he'd committed was suddenly demanding payment. And yet, before Kyle could stammer out an answer, the narrative began to expand beyond them, stretching toward Lily Winters, who at the same time was pushing Holden Novak for answers about Kane Ashby's real purpose, demanding that Holden stop playing dumb and reveal whether he knew the scope of Kane's overarching strategy. But Holden, trying to keep his cool, insisted that Lily was mistaken if she thought he was aware of Kane's grand design, claiming that he too was fumbling in the dark, though Lily could see through him with the kind of clarity that only comes when years of betrayal and manipulation sharpen a woman's instincts. And while Lily pushed Holden to admit the truth, Victor Newman, never one to waste a dramatic train encounter, sat opposite Kane Ashby on a late-night ride and provided him with tantalizing yet damning clues about Colin's most recent big scam, spinning a web that made Kane increasingly uneasy as Victor suggested Kane's massive Genoa City real estate grab had been funded with corrupt money that carried the fingerprints of Colin's deceitful hand, even though Kane swore up and down that every dollar he'd earned was legal, hard-fought, and legitimate. But Victor, with that trademark blend of gravitas and suspicion, reminded him that Colin had a lifelong habit of twisting the truth. And maybe Kane was just another pawn in his father's ever-expanding chess game of cons, leaving Kane both defensive and rattled, yet unwilling to admit how much Victor's words gnawed at him. Meanwhile, back with Claire and Kyle, the silence stretched unbearably as Claire kept searching Kyle's eyes for the missing pieces of the puzzle, for the hints that he had not, in fact, been fully honest about what happened at Kane's summer residence with Audra Charles, and Claire's gut screamed that he was withholding something significant, because Audra had been relentless in her accusations, throwing daggers in every conversation that forced Claire to wonder if her trust in Kyle was misplaced. And though Claire despised herself for doubting the man she loved, she could no longer push aside the image of Kyle and Audra together, too close, too intimate, the kind of closeness that left invisible scars on relationships. She tried to steady her voice, but there was a tremor as she pressed. Kyle, I need the whole truth, no edits, no omissions, no half-stories that you think are sparing me, because sparing me is only destroying us. And Kyle, haunted by the memory of that night in Nice when he had been wrapped in nothing but a towel and found himself locked in a heated make-out session with Audra, the kind that blurred the lines between control and surrender, knew that he had already crossed the dangerous threshold where one omission metastasizes into a full-fledged betrayal, and though he wanted desperately to minimize it, to claim it was nothing, just a mistake, just a kiss, he also knew that Claire deserved better than the diluted version of events he had been feeding her. Yet, what terrified him most was the thought of Claire looking at him with the same disgust Lily once looked at Kane when his own infidelity was revealed. And as if fate enjoyed weaving parallel storylines, Lily's interrogation of Holden Novak intensified, her disbelief at his evasions boiling over into fury, while Kane himself wrestled with Victor's insinuations about Colin's money, trying to reconcile his need for independence with the inescapable shadow of his father's crimes. And so across Genoa City, truths and lies collided like storm fronts, sparking lightning bolts of conflict in every corner of their lives. Back in Kyle's living room, Claire's patience cracked, her voice rising as she demanded, "Did you kiss her, Kyle? Did you touch her? Did you let her touch you?" And Kyle, cornered, whispered the words that felt like knives in his mouth. There was a kiss, just one kiss. But even as he said it, guilt burned because he knew that wasn't the whole truth, that he and Audra hadn't just kissed, they had stumbled into bed, his towel slipping dangerously low as they pressed against each other, nearly tumbling into something that would have shattered Claire forever if it had gone further. And though Kyle insisted to himself it hadn't crossed the final line, how could Claire believe him now, after lies had already stained the story? And how could she not see the anguish written across his face as proof that he was still hiding more? But before Claire could press harder, another storm loomed on the horizon, because Harrison Abbott was on his way home after spending time in Milan with Summer Newman, and his return threatened to throw gasoline on the smoldering fire between Kyle and Claire. For Harrison, sharp as ever and deeply bonded to Claire as his former nanny, would undoubtedly sense the growing rift, the hushed arguments, the tense silences, and in his innocent but piercing way, he would ask the questions no adult dared to voice, perhaps even exposing truths that Kyle and Claire fought desperately to contain. And as if that weren't enough chaos, Audra Charles, ever the master of manipulation, was plotting her next move, vowing that Claire would regret interfering with her designs on Nate Hastings, and if that meant exploiting Kyle's guilt, so be it, because Audra never played fair, she played to win. and the fallout from her schemes threatened not just Kyle and Claire's fragile romance but the entire Abbott-Newman alliance, since every secret has ripple effects that reach across families, stirring rivalries, betrayals, and power struggles. Kyle, caught between his loyalty to his family, his responsibility to Harrison, his crumbling honesty with Claire, and the relentless pressure from Audra, Diane, and Jack to make the right choices, felt trapped in a tightening vice, and Claire, though shaken, refused to let herself become another casualty of lies, silently promising that if Kyle couldn't trust her with the whole truth, then she would find out on her own, even if it meant confronting Audra directly or digging into the dark corridors of Kane's summer residence where secrets still lingered, because one way or another, the truth would not stay buried forever, not in Genoa City, not when every lie eventually claws its way into the light, and as the weekly preview promised, terrible news for Kyle and Claire's romance was just around the corner, a storm waiting to break, a storm fueled by lies, betrayal, vengeance, and the relentless force of love struggling to survive in the shadow of Audra Charles, Colin Atkinson, and every Newman Abbott feud that had ever scarred this town. Claire Newman's unease refused to quiet even after Kyle Abbott's reluctant admission of just one kiss, because instinct told her there was far more lurking beneath that shallow confession, and though Kyle tried to look her in the eye with a sincerity that once would have melted her doubts, the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him, convincing Claire that half-truths were now threatening to define their entire relationship, so she pressed harder, not with volume but with the piercing steadiness of a woman who demanded honesty, saying that trust could not survive on crumbs, it needed the full loaf, and Kyle, caught in the tightening snare of his own guilt, felt the walls of his carefully curated narrative collapsing, because he had already hidden the fact that in Nice, Audra Charles had pushed past his momentary hesitation until he found himself on that bed in nothing but a towel, kissing her with a reckless desperation that still haunted him. And though he had stopped before going further, the fact that he lied about it now made him feel like the betrayal had deepened tenfold. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in Genoa City, Lily Winters continued her crusade against Holden Novak's stonewalling, refusing to let his non-answers pacify her, insisting that Kane Ashby's grand strategy wasn't something Holden could plausibly be blind to, not when Holden had been in Kane's orbit for weeks, and when Holden again tried to insist he was in the dark, Lily's tone sharpened with that fiery Winters passion, reminding him that lies by omission were just as dangerous as outright fabrications, and Holden, sweating under the pressure, finally admitted that while Kane hadn't revealed the entire playbook, there had been hints, whispers, late-night calls with Colin that Holden wasn't meant to overhear, conversations about property fronts, offshore accounts, and something about laundering old money into new developments. And Lily's heart sank because Victor's warnings suddenly rang louder in her mind, warnings that Kane might be caught in a financial web of Colin's making whether he realized it or not. On that very train ride, Kane himself was pushing back against Victor Newman's heavy insinuations, insisting again and again that every dollar he had ever invested was clean, earned from sweat, sacrifice, and smart business. But Victor's eyes narrowed with that knowing look, the one that saw through generations of lies, and he told Kane that Colin was the kind of man who could convince anyone, including his own son, that dirt was gold, that stolen money was opportunity, and Kane, though enraged at the suggestion, also felt an uncomfortable chill because there had been moments when Colin's offer seemed too convenient, too well-timed, as if fate had simply bent in Kane's favor, but perhaps, as Victor suggested, it was no coincidence at all. And while Kane wrestled with that gnawing doubt, Claire, still facing Kyle in the Abbott living room, refused to drop the matter, her voice breaking as she said, "If there's even one detail you haven't shared with me, Kyle, one thing left unsaid, it will poison everything we have." And Kyle's silence in response was louder than words, his jaw tightening as though he was weighing whether to let the dam break or keep holding it back. But before he could speak, Claire's phone buzzed with a message from Nate Hastings, a message laced with frustration about Audra's recent manipulations, and as Claire read it, she realized Audra was weaving multiple webs at once, threatening not just her bond with Kyle but also her own fragile trust with Nate, which meant the woman was playing a far bigger game than anyone fully grasped. Kyle, noticing Claire's distracted expression, tried to regain control of the conversation, insisting again that it had been nothing more than a mistake, a fleeting lapse, but Claire, emboldened by Nate's words, snapped back that mistakes lose meaning when repeated lies cover them, and she could no longer shake the image of Kyle and Audra together in Nice, her imagination filling in the blanks he refused to clarify, making her stomach churn with betrayal. Yet, even as their relationship trembled, the storm clouds grew darker with Harrison Abbott's impending return from Milan, because the boy's innocence and razor-sharp intuition meant he would immediately sense the undercurrents of tension between Kyle and Claire. And as someone who adored Claire deeply from her days as his nanny, Harrison would inevitably start asking questions that Kyle dreaded answering. Questions like why Claire looked so sad or why Kyle's voice grew sharp when Audra's name was mentioned. Questions that could unravel the delicate fabric Kyle was clinging to. And speaking of Audra, she wasn't content to simply watch the cracks form. She was orchestrating the quake, already planning her next move to corner Kyle into either telling the truth himself or watching her weaponize it in a way that would shatter Claire's trust completely, perhaps by slipping photographs from that night in Nice into Claire's hands or by planting just enough suggestion in Victor's ear to turn him against Kyle. Because Audra knew that exploiting Newman's suspicion was always an easy path to chaos. Meanwhile, Kane's battle with Victor over Colin's alleged scam spilled into larger questions about loyalty, legacy, and whether Kane could ever truly separate himself from his father's corrupt shadow, with Victor warning him that unless he came clean about every financial source, he would be crushed under the weight of the Newman family's scrutiny, a threat that rattled Kane even more than he let on, because deep down he feared Victor might be right, that Colin had slipped dirty money into his accounts in ways Kane hadn't even detected. And back at the Abbott house, Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott were quietly debating how best to handle Kyle's growing entanglement with Audra and Claire, with Diane insisting that Kyle come clean before Claire discovered the truth another way, while Jack warned that rushing into a confession might destroy Kyle's chance at salvaging the relationship altogether. But Diane, hardened by her own history of lies and their consequences, knew that the longer secrets festered, the uglier the explosion would be when the truth inevitably surfaced, and she feared her son was digging himself into the kind of hole that no Abbott charm could repair. Claire, torn between her love for Kyle and her instincts that screamed he wasn't being fully honest, found herself contemplating a dangerous alternative, confronting Audra directly, demanding the unfiltered truth, even though she knew Audra would spin the story for maximum damage. But part of her reasoned that even a venom-laced confession might cut through the haze of Kyle's omissions. And as all these threads wove tighter, Genoa City braced for another stormy week, with Lily preparing to confront Kane herself after Holden's reluctant admissions, Kane battling Victor's suspicions on the train, Kyle on the brink of losing Claire's trust forever, and Audra circling like a vulture, ready to feast on the wreckage. And in the middle of it all, Harrison's innocent return promised to stir emotions that no adult scheme could fully contain. Because children have a way of piercing the heart of any lie, and Kyle knew that if Harrison asked Claire directly about Nice or Audra, the fragile house of cards he had built would collapse instantly, leaving nothing but the raw truth exposed in the ruins. Audra Charles, ever the calculating strategist, was already setting the pieces in motion for her next act of revenge, because if Claire Newman thought she could quietly chip away at her credibility or if Kyle Abbott believed his secrets could stay tucked away in shadows, both of them were in for a brutal awakening. And so Audra began by placing a subtle but devastating phone call to Victor Newman, hinting that Colin Atkinson's scam might not only involve Kane Ashby's finances but also the Abbotts themselves, implying that Kyle could have been a knowing participant in laundering Colin's dirty money through Kane's legitimate ventures. And though Victor gave nothing away on the call, Audra knew she had pressed one of his favorite buttons, suspicion, because once Victor smelled the possibility of betrayal, he would dig until the truth surfaced, whether that truth was real or just the version Audra wanted him to believe. At the same time, she crafted another weaponized angle for Nate Hastings, cornering him in the Newman Tower lobby with that faux innocent tone that dripped poison as she suggested that Claire had been leaning on Kyle far more than on Nate, that Kyle's confessions were whispered late at night in Claire's ear, and Nate, already insecure about Claire's lingering ties to Kyle and Harrison, felt the seed of doubt burrow deeper, making him bristle even though he tried to mask it. And Audra, sensing the crack, gave a sly smile and left before he could question her further, because the genius of her scheme wasn't in proving anything, it was in planting doubts that would grow on their own. Meanwhile, she had one last card to play with Kyle himself, catching him alone outside society and delivering a quiet, devastating threat cloaked as an offer. Tell Claire everything before I do, Kyle, because I promise you, the way I'll spin it will make her hate you forever. And though Kyle tried to brush it off, her words cut too close to the bone. because he knew she had the power and the audacity to follow through, especially since photographs from that night in Nice still existed, taken by someone Audra had pulled strings to keep in her pocket until the timing was perfect. And now the timing was close, too close for Kyle's comfort. All of this meant that by the time Harrison Abbott returned home from Milan, Genoa City would already be on the brink of combustion, with Victor digging into Colin's dirty money trail, Lily preparing to demand answers directly from Kane, Holden fearing exposure for what he overheard, Nate growing more suspicious of Claire, and Claire herself teetering between love and betrayal as she wondered how much of Kyle's heart she truly held. And in that volatile mix, Audra positioned herself as the match ready to ignite the powder keg, knowing that once the explosion came, she would be the one standing smugly in the ashes, the chaos having cleared a path for her own ambitions in both love and power.